Well, hello, and welcome to Choice Day Tuesday and a little bit of a truth bomb or your daily dose of body, mind, medicine. And I wanted to address this thing around worry and why I always say zebras or animals in the wild don't get ulcers, and how worry is connected to trauma, because this is obviously one of the symptoms that many of my clients come to me to resolve, because they don't know what life would look like without worry. It's just like they're eternal warriors. They worry about worrying, and that this is a pattern, a protective pattern, or a defensive pattern that we've learned to be maybe the warrior or the rescuer in the family, because it didn't feel safe. And I know that learning to live in the moment is a very special gift of a very healthy, secure attachment as children. And most of us never got that. So, forgive yourself for ever thinking that worry is a bad thing, and let go of the sort of judgment of any kind of emotion, including worry, which leads to anxiety, and often why we end up having panic attacks or giving ourselves ulcers or IBS is not your fault. Because ideally, what we want is when we sort of discover very simple pleasures like playing with crayons or learning to ride a bike and making friends. A lot of people that I work with never had that luxury of learning how to play, because they were the ones that were holding the family together, either through whatever attachment style worked for them. They were the one that's either diffused the worry, or and they did that with humor, or they did that by deflection, or they did that by being the rebel maker. And why it's so important that you get to understand how adverse childhood experiences has affected you, and maybe affecting your life and your health and your relationships or your money flows now. So when you start to realize that in a healthy, secure relationship, your parents were the consistent glue, right? They were the solid foundation, because we only need secure attachment 20% of the time, but we need something to come back to, right? We need a place to be able to diffuse, to make sense of the world. And a lot of our parents, through no fault of their own, were so self-absorbed with worrying about money or their own relationship stresses that there was a little bit of emotional neglect that was going on there. And of course, too, sometimes terrible things happen. And there are big traumas, and maybe you did grow up with an alcoholic parent who was constantly raging, and you never knew, you were always treading on eggshells because you didn't know where to put yourself out of harm's way, and all you wanted was their love, or their them to see you and to know that you matter. Or maybe you were a bully's ridicule at school, or you had bouts of depression or waves of loneliness. Any and all of those can really shatter your feeling of safe embodiment, and you can't express joy, you can't feel any emotions, because you either become so shut down to not feel any pain, or you are so hyper aroused that you never even got to have a sense of what it feels like to be happy. So how can you enjoy being with a friend, or discover what makes you laugh, or what makes you feel good about yourself, when it all might come crashing down, and that's where you're like constantly treading on eggshells. And what I commonly know and understand, because I have that sort of disorganized attachment style myself. So what happens is that you end up worrying all the time. You're kind of worrying when the next shoe's going to drop, or when something bad's going to happen, or if you even dare to feel happy, for fear that it's going to be taken away from you in the here and now. So you end up making up belief stories that validate the story from that first inception of when you had your happiness ripped away from you, where you're kind of always waiting for something terrible to happen, for the other shoe to drop. And where trauma and worry are very much connected. As I said, when you're preparing for disaster, when you're, whether that's a big T or a little t, and I talk about this a lot in some of my other videos, but it's something that is very common amongst people that have had a lot of chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress. It's not necessarily in big traumas that we talk about in the ACE studies, but in more, the daily thing of, dreading having to go to school because you know that you're going to have your lunch money taken away from the bully, or you're going to be ridiculed by your peers, or whatever it was for you. I know one of my clients the other day was speaking about how the white girls at her school set her hair on fire, and how much that sort of shaped her life, where she's like constantly on hypervigilant mode, where her nervous system never got to really be in a place of trusting that she could even create her own safety. So it's something that was necessary, right, in the coping mechanisms, where we have to become hyper aware because our environment isn't safe, where maybe a necessary survival mechanism right then was that you created a stomach ache and you made yourself violently ill in order to avoid having to go to school, for example, because it kept you safe. So they're all coping skills. And even though they work then, if you're in a constant state of survival, and I say this all the time, you can't be in a creation mode. You can't be excited about the future. You can't make plans. You can't create anything because you're constantly worrying that everything's just going to be taken away from you. And this is where we need to resolve some of these childhood patterns, right? Some of these attachment patterns that are deeply embedded in your tissues, so that you can actually start to create a new way of being in the world, or what I call realization learning. And it has to happen on that level of your nervous system, because otherwise it just hinders your growth and your healing and your contentment and your relationships, where so many people say, I don't even know what makes me happy anymore. I don't know when I last felt fulfilled or excited about my life. So if you're always anticipating the worst, if you're always double checking with people in your life, are you sure, or you're constantly apologizing, if you're always sort of prepared with a plan B, this is where we end up procrastinating, and no action is still an action. If you kind of don't believe what people say, you can't trust them because of the stories of your past, which are very valid. Then I want you to know that it doesn't have to be this way. Life doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to be a constant struggle. And it doesn't have to be this hard. And you also don't have to feel like this. And perhaps you think that it's just part of who you are now, that you don't know who you would be without all of those coping mechanisms. It's not. Just know that it was something that you set up to protect yourself and keep yourself safe when there wasn't safe role models or places where you could go to sort of offload and express your feelings. And it can't be healed and helped by noticing it alone. This is why it's like people that say, oh, don't worry, just be happy, used to drive me insane, right? It just used to amplify my anxiety. And maybe you can relate to that too, which is why mantras and don't work on their own. Meditation doesn't work on your own, because you have to change the wiring on your nervous system. And at the beginning of your healing journey, you might, like many people, feel like your negativity is never going to change. And I speak about the negativity bias in another one I'll link below. That even though you're doing everything right, you just cannot imagine a life where you can create peace and calm, where you can manifest abundance, where you can have a place that you can receive that's consistent, and where people actually do what they say they're going to do. But I can promise you this, it can change. It does change, and you can heal. And I see this happening not only in my own life, but in the lives of my clients. So, you're probably here because you are highly sensitive, you are empathic, and oftentimes you don't even know whether the worry that you're feeling belongs to you. So one way to do that, I'm going to give you a couple of ways that you can actually start to embrace all your emotions and get curious about what's underneath the worry. And if it's even yours. And one way of doing that is to just check in and ask yourself, is this thought or feeling or emotion even yours? And if you kind of get that it's not, and 99% of the time it won't be yours, then you can ask who you got it from. Because I often hear, I often hear this, that you don't have to live a life where you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. And most people are. They're like, oh my God, I can't possibly allow myself to be this happy because it's going to be taken away from me. And that's a childhood pattern. So, you've got to start looking at, is it true? And what would happen if you didn't cap your own happiness by going into this worry, which is just a distractor, where you're looking for the plan B and you're looking for all the exit strategies so that you can get yourself out of it before somebody hurts or disappoints you or lets you down or that other shoe drops. So, just look at, start to get really clear on where you have any trauma in your history. Did you grow up in a family or an environment that had secure attachment, right? Did you get that modeled to you? Or did you grow up in a family where one or both of your parents really frightened you? Or were even frightened of themselves, so they went into busyness, or they went into distraction, or they were just emotionally absent in your life? Because all of those things are often at the root of your worrying behavior. It's this chronic state of hyperarousal, and it's a coping mechanism, as I've said. It's a protective or defensive pattern, right? That makes sense of some kind of trauma that wasn't resolved in your upbringing. So moving forward, again, trust that there's hope. There are coping skills that you don't want to replace them with another coping strategy. But there are ways that you can start to neuromodulate, where you can start to create a sense of calm and peace. You bring yourself down off that hyper aroused state before you're too far down the rabbit hole that you think you're never going to get out of it. And one way, as I said, is you can start to have very honest and compassionate inquiry. Be the silent observer of the parts and pieces of you that are in a state of worry. And you can ask yourself through the mindfulness change process that I offer to my clients and get huge transformation in a very short time, right? We literally do a trauma hack, and we go back and we have that two-way dialogue, that two-way communication, where we're speaking to our little one saying, are you with me? Do we have a conversation? And then you can start to be much more compassionate with yourself. And that's the first step in starting to be your own medicine, to start to heal and thaw out some of these frozen parts of you. And one way to do that is to give yourself permission to just notice, oh gosh, there, I'm doing that thing again. And also notice if you've been using work or drugs or shopping or food or some kind of self-harming behavior to try and numb the pain, to not feel the pain. And that's a really good place to start. Another way that you can do this is, and I think it's important to be consistent and to be compassionate and gentle with yourself in the beginning, because you're going to, now that you're noticing it, notice that you do this a lot, and it's very autonomic, it's very unconscious in how you're trying to create safety, right? So just be gentle, get some support, get somebody that's going to call you on it when you're doing it from a very loving place, so that you can start to build your resilient muscle and you can start to trust yourself in finding safety in your own body. So, there's so many ways that you can do this, but when you start to experience what it feels like to have someone that's reliable, that you can go to, that's consistent, and you can start to trust that person isn't going to leave you. Because remember, underneath all of this, one of our main fears is the fear of abandonment, the fear of being cast out. And we've had many, many lifetimes where we probably were, especially if you're a sensitive and you're an empath. So when you can start to engage in consistent sessions, perhaps with a therapist or with a trauma specialist like me, then you can start to work on on these issues that are deeply rooted in your trauma physiology, that come from your past and are still playing out in your present moment. You can't create a brilliant future if you're always living in the past. And that's where the worry shows up, to create the trauma, drama, emotions, emotional and physical symptoms that'll stop you before you even get out of the tracks. So, you can start to reassess the coping skills that once kept you safe. And then you can go, gosh, well, how's that working for me right now? And you'll see that because they're no longer serving you, then you can start in that realization learning to build your trust muscle. And I think the biggest part of this too, which is such a relief, and I think I posted that yesterday, is the best antidote to anxiety and worry is to actually just trust yourself. Sorry, I'm being distracted right now. I'm coming right now. The antidote to any kind of anxiety or worry is to just cut yourself some slack and to just trust, okay, in this moment I have a choice. And this is how, when you can start to have conversations with your loved ones, you can start to express how you're feeling and say to them, there's nothing to do here. Could you just hold this space so that I can verbally process this? As a verbal processor, this works really, really well for myself. And if you feel like you can't do that with someone that you love, then find someone that's a professional that can support you. Sometimes writing those letters to your old self, right, to the parts and pieces of you that are afraid in your journal, can be very cathartic as well. But it's going to all help to build your secure attachment in your current relationship with yourself, and then with your partners or your friends or your siblings. So I think it's very important that you can say, this isn't personal. I'm not asking you to fix me or problem solve this, but this is how I'm feeling right now. And when I kind of ask you, are you sure? And I doubt what you tell me, I'm doing this because some part of me doesn't feel safe, doesn't feel like I can trust you in this space. So I want to trust myself and stop doubting me first, and just ask them, can you hold that space for me? It's such a relief when we can ask for what we want in a way, when we know that everything in our body is going to be saying it's not safe to be that vulnerable or authentic, And I really want you to really start to explore, how do you create safety? Where do you feel safe, or where do you feel unsafe? Where do you feel that people can't be trusted? And whether you kind of start to learn from me or another good trauma-informed therapist, I just want you to know that it's important to know that consistency is key. And when you can consistently start to show up for you and for the parts and pieces of you at the age that you were when you dissociated and abandoned you, and you can start lovingly bring those pieces back on a consistent basis, your trust muscle will build. So that's kind of what I do every day, and how I help trauma survivors make and maintain that positive change in their own lives, so that they can create safe, stable environments and healthy relationships, and not just cope, not just survive, but thrive through everyday challenges with new strengths and new abilities. It's important to know, stress doesn't go away, but we don't have to amplify the stresses. We don't have to give ourselves ulcers or have a chronic health challenge or a nervous breakdown before we do this work. We want to catch ourselves in that space now, before it gets to be an emergency. And if I can help you with that in any way, you know where to find me. So that is your Truth Bomb Tuesday. Just remember, the power of choice is yours, and yours alone. And it's important, you can't do this on your own. So find a place where you can create safety, or see where safety is modeled to you in a good way, so that you can start to become a good receiver of that. And let me know how you do. And I'd also love to know, do these sort of little Facebook lives Are they supportive? Are they a contribution? Or are they so way off the mark? I'd love to know, what are you struggling with right now? And how can I help you through these Facebook Lives, answer your questions and share what I know about creating secure attachment and being safely embodied, to allow your body to move you towards more of what you want and stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd love to know. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.